We're continuing the shir in Sichos HaRan. The last shir that we had, we discussed paragraph Reish Pei Beis 282 in Sichos HaRan, where Rabbi Arizal spoke about the topic of one who falls away or separates himself from the tzadik. And Rabbi Arizal said that the tzadik represents the difference between the letter Daled and the letter Reish in the Sefer Torah, where if a person takes a look, there's only a very small difference, a small piece that's called the koitza da'ois Daled, the koitza of the letter Daled that's added on, that makes the difference between Reish and Daled. Rabbi Arizal explained that the Zohar HaKadosh says that this difference between Reish and Daled means the difference between true faith in Hashem versus the opposite. When the Torah speaks about idol worship and Hashem warns against it, this worship of idols is called lo tishtachave lekel acher, that we're not permitted to bow down to anything other than Hashem. This word acher, which ends with reish, the first two letters are aleph and ches, whereas when the Torah speaks about a Jew accepting faith in Hashem, the posek says, Shema Yisrael, listen, Bnei Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echod, that our Hashem is one and there is no other like him. The word Echod has the same first two letters as Acher, the Aleph and Ches. The only difference is the Daled. And in the Sefer Torah, if you'll take a look, you'll observe that these two letters, the Daled of Echod in Parshas Voeschanan, and the Reish of Acher, Lo Tishtachave Lekel Acher, are written extra large. And this is to point out that this is a very major lesson to Bnei Yisrael, this lesson of Emunah being this minute difference between the Reish and the Daled. Who makes that difference? Rabbi Arizal says this is the tzadikim. The main purpose of a tzadik, of a Talmud Chacham, is to shine Emunah into Bnei Yisrael. We said that in teaching Torah, in being a teacher of Torah, the whole tachlis of the Torah, the pasuk says, Kol mitzvosecha emunah. Purpose of them is to infuse a person with emunah, with true faith in Hashem. And we had mentioned in the previous shir that there was one other item that we wanted to add to this. It's brought in Sforim that the zvuv, the fly, is generally known to be an annoying type of item. And it's brought that the term zvuv, which means a fly, is the symbol of Amalek. We find that usually when something spoils, it becomes rotten. One of the ways that we identify it is by that there's a lot of flies buzzing around it. The Meforshim bring a remez to this, a hint to this, in the fact that in the Torah, when Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, instructing him how to deal with Amalek and telling him what to pass on to his student Yehoshua, the posek says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ksoiv zois zikoron basefer v'sim ba'oznei Yehoshua ki mochoi ech emche ezecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, write this down and give this over verbally to Yehoshua that I'm going to erase, I'm going to annihilate Amalek. The Meforshim point out that the first letters of these four words, Zikoron Basefer, V'sim Bi'oznei, the first letters of those four words make up the word Zvuv, which means a fly, and it's brought that Amalek is represented by the symbol of the Zvuv, the fly. There's another place where this is noted. There's a place in the Navi. We know that one of the worst idol worshippers of all time was Achav. He was one of the kings of the Jews who was noted for this item. And the Torah says that at one point, Kaviochel, Hashem called a meeting in Shamayim, in heaven, and the meeting was to discuss who's going to finish Achav off, who's going to take care of Achav, to pay him back for his idol worship. And there the Torah says that Kaviochel Hashem, with his humbleness, discussed this with the Malachim. And the Navi says that there were different opinions among the Malachim as to how to deal with it. Ze bekoi v'ze bekoi. These Malachim said this way, and these malachim said the other way. And then it says, finally, one ruach spoke up and said, I know how to deal with Achav. I'll work it out. I have a plan as to how to have him killed. So the Meforshim point out a remez there again, ze bekoi, v'ze bekoi. The first letters of those four words again make up this word zvuv, referring to Achav, who was noted for his idol worship, kfira, which is the symbol of Amalek, anti-Hashem. We mentioned, I believe, in the previous shir that the words kel acher are bigematria Amalek, exactly, showing that Amalek represents atheism, anti-faith. Now, related to this zvuv, the Meforshim point out there's a very interesting item mentioned in the Gemara, which seems not to have any deep significance, and yet, based on what we've learned now, we could understand something very important from this statement in the Gemara. The Gemara says that one of the well-known Sofrim, scribes, during the time of the Gemara, was the Tana Rebbe Meir. The Gemara points out in Eruvin that at one time, Rebbe Meir said there was a discussion about putting a certain ingredient into the ink that's used for a Sefer Torah. The name of this ingredient, it's called kankantum, and there's a discussion as to whether a Sefer is permitted to use it or not. The reason why a Sefer would want to use this item is because it makes the ink last much longer. When a Sefer writes with ink that has this kankantum mixed into it, the letters stick to the parchment stronger and they're able to last much longer. If so, it would seem like a great idea. The Gemara says there's also a svara not to use it, because we learn out. There's a posek in the Chumash that says, v'kosav u'mocha. It mentions the term to write and to erase. And the Gemara says we learn out from the proximity of how those two words are written, that when a Jew writes a Sefer Torah, it must be written in such a way that the ink is erasable. He's not allowed to use a type of ink that's so strong that you can't erase it. Therefore, there are certain ingredients which, even though we would say it's a tremendous benefit and advantage that if you include this in the ink, it'll make the ink everlasting, still the Torah says that there's reason not to use that. Where do we learn it out? From v'kosav u'mocha. Now the Gemara says that Rabbi Meir, who was a lavlor, a sofer, once came before Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Shmuel asked him, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Rabbi Meir said that I'm a sofer, I'm a scribe. Rabbi Shmuel said to him, Beni, my son, hevi zohir b'malachtecha, be very careful in your work. Shemalachtecha meleches shamayim hi. Because your work, being a sofer, is literally heavenly work. You're writing Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzos. You deal with the name of Hashem constantly. Shema ato mechaser oisachas. Maybe accidentally you'll leave out one letter. Oy meyater oisachas. Or accidentally you'll put in one extra letter where you're not supposed to. Nimtzeis machriv eskol ha'olam kuloi. And by doing that, you'll be destroying the whole world. You could actually destroy a world, because we know that in the Sefer Torah, there are certain cases where a person could make a very small change in a word. Here, for example, echod acher, that little droplet of ink added on could change the meaning of the word entirely. So the Gemara says this was Rabbi Shmuel's warning to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir replied, Dovar echod yeshli, I have a certain special ingredient, v'kankantum shmoi, it's called kankantum, she'animati l'toich hadyoy, I put that into my ink, and that helps me. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel said to him, if you put kankantum into the joy, how does that help? The Torah says clearly not to use any items that give the ink a certain degree of permanence that's considered wrong when it comes to the Sefer Torah. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Meir said, what I meant to say was as follows. I meant to say, not only am I very careful when I write to make sure not to leave out a single letter or not to add a single extra letter, but even regarding the suspicion that maybe a fly, while I'm writing a Sefer Torah, maybe a fly will come by and settle on the tag of the letter Dalet. It'll settle on the tip of the Dalet and change it and erase it and change it into a resh. Even that, I have this certain item called kankantum, which I include into the ink, and that ensures that such a mistake cannot happen. This is this discussion as it's presented in the Gemara. And the Gemara goes on to discuss whether he was allowed to do this or not. The Meforshim explain that there's obviously something much deeper than just the halacha, just the pshat that's being presented here. Note, the word lavlor means a sofer. A sofer, in the wording of the Gemara, means a scribe, one who writes Sifrei Torah or other dvorim shebikdusha, tashmishe kedusha. Sofer is also the title that's used in the Gemara to refer to rabbis, talmidei chachamim, tzadikim. They are called soferim. When Rabbi Meir told Rabbi Shmuel that I am a sofer, Rabbi Shmuel warned him, be very careful in your work. Because if you are teaching Torah to Bnei Yisrael, if you are a Talmud Chacham, and it's your responsibility to be teaching, then you have to know that if you, in giving your teachings over, if you change the Torah ever so slightly, you add a drop or subtract a drop, you could be machriv oilamos, you could destroy worlds. We just saw in Parshas Bereshis, the Torah talks about Chava, adding to the tzivui of Hashem. Hashem said, don't eat from the Eitz Hadas. She just added a very tiny addition when she was telling it over to the Nachash, to the snake, by saying that Hashem said not to touch this tree, and that resulted in eating from the Eitz Hadas and introducing all kinds of horrible things to the world. So we see that the tiniest addition or subtraction in one that's teaching Torah could chas v'shalom be fatal to one and to many. Here, Rabbi Meir's response was that, and he mentioned the use of this kankantum, the use of a certain ingredient to ensure the permanence of the Sefer Torah, to ensure that the ksiva could never be erased. The Gemara made a point of saying that there is a requirement of being able to write in such a way that it can be erased. Now, this concept of writing and erasing is something that comes up specifically related to Amalek. We said that the discussion begins that Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ksoiv zois zikoron basefer, write this down, v'sim bosne Yeshua, and tell over to Yeshua, ki mochoi emche ezecher Amalek, that I'm going to erase the memory, any trace of Amalek. We see again in this same posek, the ksiva and the mechia both being mentioned, just as in the halacha of the type of ink to be used for a Sefer Torah. Rabbi Meir's response to Rabbi Shmuel was, don't worry, I'm a student of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, being the great tzaddik that he was, he taught me the most important lesson that a Jew needs to know. He taught me that in being a sofer, in being a Talmud Chacham, the thing that I have to be able to be watchful for is that a zvuv should not come along and change the dalid into a reish. Zvuv, we said, is the symbol of Amalek. And what's Amalek's mission? Amalek's purpose is to be machlif, to exchange the dalid for a reish. To exchange the Hashem Echad, the emunah, to take the emunah of a Jew and to toy with it, to tamper it, to change it a little bit, to get people just to subtract from their faith a little bit. And that change from the Dalet to the Reish, that visartem, a tiny little bit of turning away from Hashem, va'avadetem elakim acherim. That right away constitutes an idol worship, which could be dangerous. And Rabbi Meir was implying that this was the lesson that he understood so well, how delicate the Torah is, and how careful, how watchful a person has to be about adding to it the tiniest bit and subtracting. And in terms of giving over this message of emunah, the understanding of the difference between this echod and acher, that this was the basis for all of his teachings. One additional item we find as a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that points out that one of the outstanding miracles in the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishnah says that there were 10 major miracles in the Beis Hamikdash. One of them was that even in the Beit Mitbachayim, even where they dealt with slaughtered animals in the Beis Hamikdash, and we know that usually when there's dead meat, flies are usually buzzing around it, the Gemara says that there was never seen loinire zvuv bebeis mitbochaim of the Beis Hamikdash. Not once was a fly seen there. What's so special about this? We know that the Gemara says in a different place, the Gemara uses the wording toiv shebetabochim shutvoy shel Amalek, that the best of the butchers is a partner to Amalek. He's considered a shutav to Amalek. The Gemara says that a butcher by trade, naturally again, this doesn't mean 100%, because if there were no butchers, no kosher butchers, we wouldn't have meat for Shabbos and other things. But the Gemara says that this trade specifically, a butcher who deals with meat, with live meat, with dead meat, with animals, and develops a certain callousness towards flesh, unfortunately, a lot of times this will show itself, this will spill over to a certain callousness for human life also. Rahman al-Itzlan. So here the Gemara says, Toiv shabet habochim shutvoy shel Amalek. He's considered a partner to Amalek in showing how low a place this has. The reference to the taboch being associated with Amalek, and the point being made that in the mitbachayim of the Beis Hamikdash there was no zvuv seen there, showing that there, the meat that was slaughtered for the korbanos was complete kedusha. There was no trace of Amalek, there was no trace of tumah to be found there. This, honestly, is a little bit of what's written in the Chassidish Sforim about this item that Rabbi Arizal mentioned here, this point being made of tzadikim, that the tzadik is the symbol of this koitz of the Dalit. We mentioned before that if you take the letter Dalit, we mentioned in the previous year, the letter Dalit and the letter Reish, the letter Dalit in Hebrew has a numerical value of 4, Reish has a numerical value of 200. The difference between 4 and 200 is 196, which is the word koitz in Hebrew, which means that little piece, a little thorn that sticks out, that extends from the Reish, making it into a Dalit. Halavai, we should be zecha to emunah b'shleimus. The next paragraph, Rabbi Arizal says, paragraph Reish Pei Gimel, this is actually Rav Nosson Zal speaking, and he says, I heard someone say over in the name of Rabbi Arizal regarding young, newly married people, specifically, that Rabbi Arizal had commented that quite often, when it comes to these people davening, quite often their tefillah is mevulvul. They find that they don't concentrate well in tefillah, and they don't apply themselves well. And one of the main reasons is because they feel regret and remorse over the fact that they didn't conduct themselves properly regarding their wives, in terms of their behavior with their wives, that it should be done with complete purity, following all the requirements of the Torah. As a result of that, when it comes the following morning, when it comes to Shachris especially, and Bechlal throughout the Tefillah, the person feels sorry about the fact that they didn't conduct themselves b'kedusha, and this brings about a bilbul in the Tefillah where it ends up destroying pretty much the person's Tefillah. And Rabbi Arizal warned about this several times, stressing that people should be careful not to allow this to happen to them, not to let themselves fall. Umaydahava hava. The Gemara says that before a person is about to do a sin, we give him all the encouragement in the world and all the strength in the world, and we'll talk about it for hours. Once a sin has been done, a person has to be very careful to watch out whether they're thinking about it. Is there Yetzer Tov that's encouraging them to think about it, to think about how sorry they feel about it and the remorse and regret? Or is it the Yetzer Hara that's going to try to use that one avera that the person committed as an excuse to do hundreds more, to get the person depressed and upset, and as a result of that, the person feels, well, once I did this thing wrong, then how could I stand before Hashem and daven? My tefillah is like an insult to Hashem. So the person will forfeit their davening and other things. Whereas Rabbi Arizal stressed that b'shas hatefillah, a person has to see to it to forget everything, to blank out their mind completely from the past, especially any past sins that a person did. Otherwise, the person will feel too weak and too ashamed to be able to speak to the king, to be able to speak to Hashem, and to be miskaber, to daven with simcha, the way a Jew is supposed to be davening. Rabbi Arizal commented that this is also hinted to in a Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara says that Abba Binyamin, who was one of the rabbis of the Gemara, said that there were two things that he yearned for very much. One of the two was al tfilosi shetehei samuch lemitosi, that my tefillah should be close to my bed. And the Gemara gives different interpretations as to what this is referring to, different certain halachas that we learn from this statement that he made. Rabbi Arizal says that the bed is the symbol of the kesher between husband and wife. And here also, this was the tefillah of Abba Shol, that he was asking that even after mitosi, my tefillah should be samuch. I should be able to be mispalel immediately after that, without feeling any bilbul at all, any confusion, or without feeling ashamed and embarrassed, and as a result of that, having my tefillah weakened. This was Rabbi Arizal's statement related to this item. One important item that we mentioned before, but because it's very much related to this, and because of the extreme importance of this, is something that Rav Nosson Zal says in Likutei Halachos related to this. Rav Nosson Zal says that we know that the most important part of something is usually the bottom line. A lot of times people say, what's the bottom line? The bottom line means what's the most significant item in what you're presenting, what you want to say. Therefore, Rav Nosson Zal says that when it comes to the yontif of Simchas Torah, where a Jew makes a siyum on the Torah, we finish reading the entire Torah, and we begin brand new. Obviously, if we analyze that last line of the Sefer Torah, that has possibly the most important message of all in it for us. What's the last line in the Sefer Torah? The Torah says, it speaks about the Yod HaChazaka, the Moira HaGodol, the awesome things that Moshe Rabbeinu accomplished for Bnei Yisrael. And the Gemara says, what specifically is it referring to over there? It's referring to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos, because the actual last words of the Sefer Torah are Le'enei Kol Yisrael. What Moshe Rabbeinu did before the eyes of Bnei Yisrael. The Gemara says this refers to his act of taking the luchos and smashing them when he saw that the Jews were worshipping the Egel HaZohov. That's the closing line of the Sefer Torah. And then we begin immediately from Bereshis Bor Elokim. Rav Nosson Zal says, why is it this way? The Gemara tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos, what happened was the luchos had two parts. There was the actual stone on which these letters were inscribed, and there were the letters of the Torah. The Gemara says that when the luchos were broken, the stone fell to the ground, whereas the letters flew up to Shamayim. Oisios porchos ba'avir. The Gemara says that as a result of this breaking of the luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu did, that's what introduced shikha into the world, the power of forgetfulness. Just as when a person learns something, the Torah says, Kosvam al luach libecha, that the divrei Torah that a person learns, they're supposed to inscribe it, scratch it out on the tablets of your heart, the luchos of the lathe. And when a person forgets, it means obviously that whatever was engraved on the luchos of the lathe left. So too, when Moshe Rabbeinu took these luchos of stone and broke them, this is what the Gemara says introduced shikha into the world. Most people, Rabbi Arizal said, say that shikha is a terrible item. The fact that people learn and they forget, or the fact that people experience things in life and they forget them, people feel terrible about it. People say, I wish I could remember everything. Rabbi Arizal said, when in fact, shikha is a very big bracha, because of the fact that there are many things in a person's life which, if were it not for the fact that they're able to forget, a person would not be able to go on and start again. For example, this case of Bnei Yisrael worshipping the Egel HaZohav, they committed the worst crime of going against Hashem in such an insulting way. Were it not for the fact that they were able to forget that, there would be no chance in the world of them ever making an attempt to come back to Hashem. How do you look Hashem in the eye and say, bring me close to you or give us rain, if we were to remember perfectly clearly that we stabbed Hashem, chas v'shalom, that we insulted Hashem in such an incredible way? Elomai, Hashem gave us this gift. Rav Nosson Zal says that at times, certain tragedies or certain terrible things that happen in a person's life, that a person must know that there's a mitzvah to forget. There's a mitzvah to put it aside completely, to bury it, in order that a person will be able to continue to start fresh. And this is the important lesson, in that these are the words at the end of the Torah. Right before we start from Bereshis Bora Likim Es Hashemayim V'Soretz, before a Jew is ready to begin a new cycle of the Torah, which is actually the beginning of a new year, because from Rosh Hashanah till Simchas Torah is all holiday season. We're closing the previous year, and we're starting the new year. We begin reading from Parshas Bereshis, the Shabbos after Simchas Torah. So in order to begin the new year, and in order to begin the Sefer Torah anew, a Jew must know that they have to first be able to clear the registers, to forget completely. Whatever I did in the previous year doesn't count. It doesn't matter. I have a chance now to start fresh, brand new, and to climb as high as I want to go. And the fact that I did things wrong before, the fact that there was anything missing from before, that's not going to hold me back or prevent me in any way from achieving the total success that I want to in the new year. And in fact, Rav Nosson Zal says, we know that these items are connected, that the world is made up of sholosh koimos, three major foundations, in a sense, to the world. There's time, of which a complete cycle is a year. There's the world itself, there's space, which we consider the olam, the world, and there's nefesh, people who are considered the highest degree of life in the world. These three, olam, shana, and nefesh, they all are coordinated with each other. For example, just as the shana, the year, has 365 days to it, so too we're told that in the body there's a corresponding concept of 365 tendons. There is a correspondence between the nefesh and the shana. And so too with the olam also, the way that the world is structured. The Gemara discusses this in a few places. The position of Eretz Yisrael being in the center of the world, just as the heart is in the center of the body. That's the source of life for the entire world. And these three koimos of olam, shana, and nefesh all draw from the Torah. Just as there are 365 days to the year, there are 365 loisases in the Torah. So we see that the year and the person and the place are all plugged into the Torah. And all of them have to be able to understand this rule, this yesod, that before a person can make a new beginning, the person has to be capable of rising to the occasion, being big enough and smart enough to be able to know what not to remember, what not to think about. And this is the great achievement that the Gemara praises Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara says that when Moshe Rabbeinu did this, Hashem said to him, Yasher koichacho, yofo asiso sheshibarto. You did a wonderful thing in breaking the luchos. Why? Because were it not for that, the Jews could never begin anew. If they had their previous sins staring them in the face, their previous failures, they could never start fresh. The only way a person can make a new aschala is by clearing the registers. And this is the point that Rabbi Arizal made here in this paragraph in terms of a person starting the day new, shachris. A person wants to start even though the day actually begins, according to the Torah, from nighttime, from Ma'ariv. But we know that for most average people, they consider the beginning of the day shachris, that morning tefillah. So that even if a person didn't behave perfectly at night, here Rabbi Arizal stresses that a Jew is not permitted to allow that to be mavalvel. Don't forfeit your shachris because of your night, but rather to make a cut and to say, I'm starting brand new. And for my shachris has nothing to do with last night. I'm going to daven as if this was the first tefillah of my life. And if a person davens that way, obviously that tefillah will bring the right results. The next paragraph, Reish Pei Daled, 284, Rabbi Arizal says that regarding Bnei Hanourim, sometimes you have children, or this refers to like older children that are the age of 13, 14, 15, where they're starting to grow. And sometimes a child is zeicha to be nislahev, to come to a realization of wanting to be frum. Suddenly a person gets the right encouragement or whatever it is, and they suddenly decide that they want to start doing things much better than they were doing before in terms of tefillah, davening loud, bekoyach. And Rabbi Arizal says quite often what happens is when they start doing this in a shul, automatically there are some people that make fun of them. There are people that point to them, look at him, look how funny he looks, or look how funny he sounds, he's davening louder, or different things like that. And they cause suffering to these Bnei Hanourim who are trying to be more religious. They're trying to grow. And then what happens is, sometimes, usually they'll do it once or twice, the other person will ignore them. But if they'll do it a few times, what happens is, because we're dealing with Bnei Hanourim, because we're dealing with younger people, after the second or third time, he's liable to get upset or angry and either go over to the person and slap him or yell at him, why are you bothering me, or insult him, etc. So Rabbi Arizal says quite often, the one that did this is a smart aleck, and he says, what's wrong? I didn't do anything to bother you. If you're really having kavanah, then you wouldn't see what I'm doing. If I'm making faces at you or I'm doing other things like that to disturb you, if you're really having kavanah, it shouldn't bother you. You shouldn't see what I'm doing at all. And Rabbi Arizal says they think that it sounds so smart and so right, when in fact, Rabbi Arizal says this is 100% wrong. Because even the biggest tzadik, afilu tzadik godoil amiti migdoile hamefursamim be'emes, even the greatest of tzadikim, who daven bekoyach and with dveikus, if somebody will come, Rabbi Arizal says, and stand in front of him and make fun of him and try to disturb his tefillah, they will definitely be able to do it. It will cause a bilbul and it will cause tsar. So therefore, that's not a proof that the other person's tefillah is lacking in kavanah or anything like that. The fact that you're able to disturb him by making faces at him or doing things like that isn't because he was lacking kavanah. That's the way it's supposed to be. Unless, Rabbi Arizal says in one place in Likutei Moharan, there are certain exceptional tzaddikim who could achieve such a degree of dveikus in their tefillah, where when they're davening, it's as if nothing exists. They're able to block out everything around them. That could be one person in a generation. That's not even something that applies to regular Talmidei Chachamim or regular tzadikim. Rabbi Arizal says for regular great tzadikim, it's only natural that if somebody will stand in front of them and disturb them in the tefillah, they will be able to pull it off. And therefore, if somebody does this to these Bnei Hanourim, they should know that they definitely will be held responsible. It's not that he's not really a tzaddik, because if I was able to disturb him, he couldn't be that big a tzaddik. Rabbi Arizal says, on the contrary, could be that what he's doing is perfect, and you're disturbing him is still considered 100% a criminal act. It's interesting that in an earlier paragraph, Kapitel Kuf Yud Zayin in Sichos HaRan, R Nosson says that one time he was having a discussion with Rabbi Arizal, And Rabbi Arizal said that if a person is holding by this, then he's really okay. And Rabbi Arizal really was like making motions with his hands, implying that if a person is holding by this item, then he's something very special. Rav Nosson says, I don't remember the entire discussion, but I remember that what he was talking about was the fact that if a person could develop a nature where even if he's not that religious, even if he's not feeling that frum, if he sees his friend being more religious than him at that time, whether it's he sees the friend davening with more kavanah than him, or giving more tzedakah than him, or doing anything much better than him, he should be perfectly happy, satisfied, not feel anything wrong, anything negative inside him about the fact that somebody else is better than him in Yiddishkeit. And Rabbi Arizal used the wording at the time that for a person to say that even if I'm not zoiche to serve Hashem, at least let somebody else serve Hashem. Meaning that my respect for Hashem as a king is such that I understand, at least I know that if somebody is not serving Hashem, it's a bad item. So just because one person can't do it, why should a second person lose out? If Hashem has 600,000 servants in front of him, if one is bad, it's one thing. If 1,000 of them are bad, it's that much more insulting to Hashem. And certainly that's not something I want. And Rabbi Arizal mentioned about this, that this is a tremendous madrega if somebody's holding by this. Rav Nosson commented about this, that he was very surprised because he couldn't imagine anything different from this. He couldn't imagine how anybody would be thinking along any different track than this, in terms of wanting only the best for somebody else, even if I myself am not holding by it, and not feeling any kind of a jealousy of wanting to bring somebody else down to my level. And Rav Nosson adds, but unfortunately, I've lived to see that this is definitely an existing problem. He writes that I've seen, especially among Bnei Neurim, especially among kids and kids that are growing up, this is a very serious ongoing problem. That quite often, when one kid or a few kids have fallen, where the Yetzer Hara has hold of them and they're into childishness, they're into silly things, they're into clowning around, and they see one other person who decides to be different. He wants to be frum, he wants to daven the right way, or he wants to do a mitzvah really well. Instead of being happy for him, instead of being happy that at least somebody is serving Hashem, rather than that, out of jealousy, they end up trying to do whatever they can to make fun of him in a way that they'll actually try to bring him down. And Rav Nosson says, in fact, there are many cases where this has happened. There are cases where a person decided at one time to become more religious, and they were doing it for a period of time and being successful at it, but in the end they ended up giving it up because they couldn't handle the bizyonos. They couldn't handle people making fun of them, saying all kinds of insulting things related to any type of item, whether it be visiting kivrei tzadikim or other types of items that people that don't have a respect for a certain item, people that don't have an appreciation for a certain item in religion, because I don't do it, number one, it certainly can't be anything worthwhile doing it. And if somebody is doing it, obviously he's a fool. And if he's a fool, it's a mitzvah to make fun of him. This is a type of attitude that people take, and obviously this is something that a person has to understand and watch out for in a very big way. Rabbi Arizal says that a person should know that in terms of madregos, what a person should be aspiring for is to reach a certain level when not only am I happy when I succeed at serving Hashem, but there's a whole separate simcha entirely in seeing another Jew pleasing Hashem. And when a person reaches that madrega, that's a point where a person will find that nothing that somebody else does can harm them, can bring them down. On the contrary, their jealousy, when they'll see somebody else being more religious than them, if there will be any jealousy, the jealousy will only give them the chance to climb, to rise to that person's madrega, rather than wanting that person to fall down to where I am. Halavai, we should be zecher to learn from the types of midos that are expressed here, what Hashem is looking for in a person, and to try to emulate the derech that Rabbi Arizal sets forth here. And in that Sichos, we should be zecher to see the coming of Moshiach, the binyan Beis Hamikdash, Meher Yameinu, Amen v'Amen.